I think it's a question worthy of a conversation. I think that we've been programmed, and it's not a good thing or a bad thing. It's just how we've been programmed. So I think behind every substance addiction or some addiction on some gaming or media or whatever, there's an emotion that the person is doing their best to regulate. So let's just say a person has been exposed to a trauma, right? And when we have an event in our life that changes our emotional state, the stronger the emotion we feel from the shock, the betrayal, the trauma, the news, whatever it is, the more altered we are inside of us, the more the brain freezes a frame and takes a snapshot, and that's called the long-term memory. And long-term memories, so we remember them because we can remember the feeling associated with them. So what most people don't know is that trauma or those series of events alters our internal state, and every time we think about or remember the trauma, we produce the same chemistry in the brain and body as if the event was occurring. Now, the body is so objective that it doesn't know the difference between the real-life experience that's creating that emotion or the emotion that person is fabricating by thought alone. And it only takes a thought and a feeling, an image and emotion, a stimulus and response, and you're actually conditioning the body subconsciously into that emotional state. And that sets the baseline of that person's emotional state. So then the person goes, God, I feel empty, I feel anxious, I feel unworthy, I feel resentment, I feel frustrated, and I don't know how to change it. So then they look for things in their outer world to make that feeling go away. So whether it's a drug, whether it's gaming, whether it's pornography, whether it's complaining, doesn't matter what it is. But let's just use a pill as an example, or a drug, a recreational drug. The person takes a recreational drug. The moment they take the recreational drug, they notice a change in their emotional state. And the moment they notice that change in their emotional state, they associate that change with what caused it, and they remember what caused it. So that starts to create a dependency. Now, I think there are degrees of addiction. Some are very physiological, receptors are modified. But when you get right down to it, an addiction is when the body has been conditioned to be the mind. So then the person, every time they start feeling the emptiness, they feel the unworthiness, they feel the frustration, they feel the anxiety, their brain creates the image of what they need to do to make that feeling go away. And the last time, or the last series of times, it was that exogenous substance or that activity that made it go away. Now, here's the problem. Let's use gaming as an example, okay? So when you blow someone up, or you break through a certain level, or you shoot someone, or you get points for whatever you're doing in a game, there's a release of dopamine in the brain, and dopamine is the reward chemical. It's the pleasure chemical. The problem is that the amount of dopamine that's released in a very short interval of time is outside of normal. So now, rush dopamine into the brain, and the receptor sites on the outside of the cell say, this is way too much dopamine than I'm used to processing. So the receptor sites actually close down. They shut down. So now, in order for the person to get that same feeling, they got to play more. They got to do more. The stimulus has got to be greater. So over time, we start recalibrating those pleasure centers, those receptors, to a higher level. Now, what's the significance of that? In the absence of that stimulation, our pleasure centers have been hijacked to such a high level that we can't find pleasure in anything. You can't find pleasure from a sunset. You can't find pleasure from sitting down at the table and having a meal with your family, playing with a dog, going to see your grandparents. Especially for a lot of children, you can look at them and you can see that something happened to them where they're just glazed over. That's because they're kidnapped by the technology. And so in order for them to get that same rush, they have to play more, they have to do more. Now, here's really the big problem. Learning should be a reward in and of itself, right? I mean, learning should be a reward. But now, for most people, they need a stimulus. They need something to drive their attention to whatever they're learning. And now attention is dependent on something outside of us. And when you capture people's attention, you capture their energy. So, and you can program them as a result of it. So the solution then is to teach people how to self-regulate. So we see people that come to our work that have had problems with addictions, all kinds of addictions. But really, it's some emotional addiction that really they're trying to change, right? And so they just been programmed to think that it has to happen outside of us. So what we discovered in our research is that you could actually turn that hypnosis, that conditioning around, and not wait for the experience to produce the emotion, but teach people how to self-regulate their emotional states and be able to trade resentment, frustration, anxiety for an elevated emotion. And if you keep practicing it, you get really good at what you practice. So good at it that you actually become it. So then when people start to self-regulate, we actually measure what happens to their physiology when they do it properly. And it becomes a habit. And so then when the person notices then that their body's out of balance, they have one of two choices. They can rely on some exogenous substance or something outside of them, or they can take a moment and recalibrate their emotional state. And the only challenge, I think, with addictions is that the moment you say, I'm not going to drink coffee, I'm not going to smoke cigarettes, I'm not going to drink alcohol, I'm not going to have sugar. The moment you make that conscious declaration with your conscious mind, the body has been conditioned and dependent on that substance. So 2 hours goes by and the body has modified its receptor sites and it starts talking to the brain. It starts saying, Rangan, why don't you start tomorrow? Tomorrow's a better day. Any other day but this day, this is not a good day for you. It's my parents' fault, it's my boss, it's the news. And that thought is being driven by the body-mind. Now, if we act on that thought, we make it the same choice, we do the same thing, we create the same experience, we feel the same emotion, and then all of a sudden that emptiness or that emotional state goes away, and the person returns back to the known. So there is a biological, there is a neurological, there's a chemical, there's a hormonal genetic death of the old self because you're breaking that stimulus and response. That inhibition then causes the body to feel chaos. It's looking for the known, the familiar. So instead of white knuckling it to the other side, we teach people how to regulate their internal emotional states. And over time, you start seeing the moment you're feeling an elevated emotion like gratitude or appreciation or kindness or care or in love with life, you don't need anything outside of you to make you feel better. You're actually doing it by yourself. And people can sustain these states like any habit for an extended period of time. We have the perception that something in our world could possibly get worse. We switch on that primitive nervous system, right? That fight or flight nervous system. And now the game is fight, run, or hide. The problem is with human beings, when we're at it, we feel like a loss of control. Our brain all of a sudden tries to control everything in our life. So every person, every object, everything, every place, every experience that you've ever had is mapped in your neocortex. So the arousal of the stress hormones drives the brain into a very high brainwave state called high beta. But then as you shift your attention from one meeting to another text to another person to another thing to another place you have to go, every one of those different elements has a neurological network in the brain. So like a lightning storm in the clouds, the brain starts firing out of order. It starts firing incoherently. And when the brain is incoherent, we're incoherent. And so think about when you're stressed. The most common thing that people do is they over-focus. They narrow their focus on whatever it is that's driving them to pay attention to it. And so then the act of paying attention to the problem is actually driving the brain further out of balance. And we've studied this. When you analyze that problem, that circumstance, that condition within the emotion that you are feeling and derived by the hormones of stress, you'll make your brain worse 100% of the time, because the analysis, the over-analysis is driving it further into a higher thinking, higher beta brainwave state. So this kind of narrow focus is what causes the brain to be a house divided against itself. So we thought, well, why don't we do the opposite? Why, instead of narrowing our focus on the cause, something physical, something material, because the hormones of stress actually heighten the senses and cause us to become materialists. So matter is the issue when there's survival. It's whatever's around the corner. It's whatever's going to happen. So we said, okay, let's teach people something else. Let's teach them how to broaden their focus. And as they broaden their focus and take their attention off of everything material and everything known and focus on space, focus on nothing, the act of doing that actually starts slowing down the analytical mind. You can't analyze when you're sensing. and it starts to change the person's brainwaves into a slower brainwave pattern.
Right.
And so now as you start slowing your brainwaves from that high beta, you start slowing down, you're shifting gears, you go into a mid-range beta, then you go into a low-level beta, and then all of a sudden you get into alpha. Now alpha, when you're in alpha, the voice in your head, the critic in your mind goes away. That voice that's talking to you stops, and the brain tends to see in images, in pictures. That's the imaginary state. That's the creative state. And in alpha, when you're out of survival, you're looking for answers. You're creative. You're looking for new ways of doing things. So when they broaden their focus, not only do they move into alpha, but all of a sudden we start seeing those different compartments of the brain that were once subdivided.
Yeah.
All of a sudden starting to unify. Different communities of neurons that were fragmented start to synchronize. The front of the brain talking to the back of the brain, the right side of the brain talking to the left side of the brain. You start knowing something good is starting to happen, and the person's starting to create more order. So when you see those psychic union of two hemispheres coming together, you know, the polarity, that person starts to feel incredibly whole. And coherence, when you have waves that are coherent, when they build or interfere with each other, their waves get bigger. And the higher the amplitude of the wave, the higher the energy in the brain. All of a sudden, the person starts to become very relaxed and no longer stressed in a program, and kind of alert and awake. At the same time, when you're resentful or frustrated or impatient and you're sitting in traffic, the same hormones are released and your heart is actually beating like there's a tiger behind you, but you can't run, you can't fight, you can't hide, and the traffic is frustrating you even more. You're releasing more of those chemicals, so the heart starts beating against the closed system. And when that happens, the heart starts beating out of order. Now, the heart's incoherent. So when incoherent waves interfere with each other, they're out of order, they diminish energy, and the brain energy leaves the heart. And this is when we stop trusting. This is not a time to communicate. This is not a time to learn. This is not a time to be creative. And energy leaves the heart. So we discovered then when a person truly starts practicing those elevated emotions, the heart gets very orderly, very coherent as well. And now, when you start feeling the emotions of the things that you want in your life or that you would like to create in your life ahead of the actual experience, it's impossible for you to want it. Why could you possibly want it if you feel like it's already happened? Now, here's the cool part. Maintain that modified state of being. Get so good at doing it with your eyes closed. Start practicing with your eyes open. And if you can maintain that modified state of mind and body your entire day, coherent heart, soon as energy reaches the heart, we've done thousands of studies on this, it's going straight to the brain. The heart starts to inform the brain that it's safe to create. At the exact same time, the heart begins to produce an external magnetic field. You've got a Wi-Fi signal now. You start feeling connected. You start feeling more whole. The brain is coherent. It's directing a very clear vision of what it wants. Combine that clear intention with an elevated emotion, you have a different Wi-Fi signal. You have a different energy. And now the cool part about that is you start to see those synchronicities, those coincidences, those opportunities start showing up in your life, and you're not going anywhere to get them. They're actually coming to you. Now let's just look at the biology of this.
Yeah.
Epigenetics says it's the environment that signals the gene. Genes don't create disease. Our response to the environment actually creates disease. Well, the end product of an experience in the environment is called an emotion. So the person who lives by the same emotion every single day, the body's so objective, it's believing it's living in the same environment, doesn't know the difference. And they keep the same genes signaled in the same way. Genes make proteins. Proteins are responsible for the structure and function of your body. The expression of proteins is the expression of life. And the person now is in the same emotional state. They're expressing the same genes, and nothing changes in our life until we change.
Yeah.
Okay, so now the person who trades resentment and frustration and anger and everything else for an elevated emotion, and they can sustain that state, the body's so objective that it's believing it's living in a different environment.
Yeah.
So they're knocking on the genetic door. So the elevated emotion the person memorizes, The body is so objective, it doesn't know the difference between the real life experience that's creating that emotion and the emotion that person's regulating by thought alone. Keep knocking on the genetic door. You down-regulate the gene for disease and you up-regulate the gene for health because their body's in a different emotional state and the body's believing it's living in a different environment. And we've done studies with novice meditators, and we were curious to see what kind of biological changes would take place in 1 week if you went all in, like immersed yourself in the entire week-long event. We draw blood, and we look at about 2,882 metabolites, all exosomes, gene expression, and at the end of 7 days, the novice meditators, almost 100% of them, show substantial biological changes in their blood that suggests that they're living in a different environment. Now, here's the weird part about it. They're in a ballroom. There's nothing going on in a ballroom. I've been to thousands of ballrooms. There's nothing very exciting going on in a ballroom. They're actually making those changes inwardly. And I say to our research team, where are those chemicals coming from? Where are they coming from? The person's not taking any substance. Yeah. It's coming from within us. And so the nervous system starts manufacturing a whole pharmacy of chemicals equal to the person's intention and emotional state. And it's how we think and how we feel that begins to alter things in our lives. Yeah. Just do exactly what you ask him. There's the guy, his heart's blown wide open, he's crying, he's hugging his wife, and she's looking at me like, what happened to him? He just fell into something really big. So yes, of course. Something similar, but in terms of this kind of genre, we have a very high percentage of men that come to our work. And I think the number one reason why, Rangan, is because we use science as the model. We rationalize. We combine quantum physics with neuroscience, with neuroendocrinology, with psychoneuroimmunology, the mind-body connection, epigenetics, electromagnetism. We build a model. So guys they like to understand all of that stuff so they can reason with it so they can leap. Women somehow tend to be a lot more intuitive. Yeah. It resonates with them. They trust that, and they just seem to flow a little differently. But then again, we have men that come, and of course, a lot of times their partner wants them to come, but they really come because they notice the change in their partner. They're like, wow, they're way different. I can see that their response to things is completely different. In other words, my memory of them, this person is not fitting into how I remember them. They're out of phase, So then when men finally do commit and they understand the science, and gosh, I mean, it's a really big thing for a man to get in touch with those feelings, right? Because in the game of competition, the rut, the roost, you're always trying to compete. You're always trying to get ahead. You're always can't be vulnerable. Well, that works for a really a good amount of time when you are matter trying to change matter, when you got to do things and you got to work hard and you got to be driven and all that stuff, sacrifices. But we teach that there's another way to create, and that is really that opportunity for them to open their hearts. Now, I have stood next to men that have done it and completely reversed a health condition within a very short amount of time because, here comes the house of cards. They just realize that they've been holding this facade, this image of themselves, just so that they can keep up and play the game. And instead of waiting for crisis or disease or diagnosis, and once they get in touch with their feelings again, there's nothing like a man who's leading with his heart. Oh my God, they consider the whole. And then you take a look at women, and this is just, again, a general observation. Women hold the family together. They make a whole lot of sacrifices. They continue to forgive. They do a lot of things. They put themselves after they've taken care of their family. And all of a sudden, they already know how to love. You just teach them how to get very clear on their intention. And watch out. I mean, women do amazing work.
A couple of times in this conversation, the word practice has come up, and you mentioned earlier on, what we practice, we get good at. So for many people, the first thing they do in the morning is that they practice stress. They get up, whether it's the news or emails or social media, in what I consider to be a very important time of the day, they allow the environment to start conditioning their mind, and then that conditions their body. Certainly that's the way I see it. And in a view of what we've been talking about so far, of course, we've mentioned addictions, which are rife these days. How important to you is the first part of the day when someone has woken up? Is that a critical part of the day where people have to be very intentional, or can they do some of the work that you promote later on? Or do you think first thing in the morning is a very important part of the day?
I'm going to be really careful about this. I think there's two times the door to the subconscious mind opens up. When we wake up in the morning and we go to bed at night. And it's simple brain chemistry and simple physiology. We have a circadian rhythm. As soon as there's light, our body has been pretty much programmed that we begin to release serotonin and different chemicals that kind of wake us up. So our brain waves go from delta to theta to alpha to beta. And you kind of slide up this way, and then you're back to conscious awareness and local in space and time. When you go to bed at night, you go from beta to alpha to theta to delta, and you slide down. Now, if you're stressed, you can't stop thinking. You stay in beta, and your thinking actually is arousing the body because you're thinking about your problems. You can't slide down, right? So those 2 points in the day, when we wake up in the morning and go to bed at night, when alpha, or our analytical facilities are suppressed, we're in theta, we're in a hypnotic state. Mm-hmm. And the door between the conscious mind and the subconscious mind is wide open. What separates the conscious mind from the subconscious mind is the analytical mind. So as you suppress analytical facilities, you can program anybody to do anything. So then what really happens for most people before they even reach for their cell phone, and by the way, the statistics are 86% of the people in the Western world, first thing they do is they reach for the cell phone and they connect to everything that's known.
And why is that a problem?
Well, I would never tell people how to think, but I would give them information to cause them to think. So the device is reminding them of things that are known. And every person, every object, everything, every place is mapped neurologically in our brain because we've experienced it. And then we have an emotion associated with our coworker, with our boss, with our ex, with our whoever. And so the moment we start responding,
David Verghese won his battle.
So now the environment is actually controlling the person's feelings and thoughts.
Yeah.
And anything that controls the way we feel and the way we think, we're victims to. So something's programming us to think and feel a certain way. There's nothing wrong with that. You should check your text, and do whatever you need to do. But the first thing in the morning, if the door between the conscious mind and the subconscious mind is open, why don't we program a new behavior? Why don't we rehearse a different way of being with our children, with our spouse, in our Zoom meetings, when we're alone, when we're in traffic? Is there a better way to evolve our experience? So if you're truly in the game of evolution, you're truly in the game, like one lifetime, one day. What am I working on today? Can I respond a different way to this person? Can I think this way instead of that way? Let me be conscious of my unconscious thoughts. Let me not be in a habit. Let me stay away from certain emotions. Let me practice feeling these emotions, see if I can maintain it. Now you're in the game. You're out of the bleachers and you're on the playing field. So it actually happens even before the cell phone. Because what most people do is they wake up and the first thing they do is the brain is a record of the past. They think of their problems. And those problems are just memories that are etched in the brain that are connected to certain people and objects at certain times and places. Yeah. The moment they think of their problems, they're thinking in the past. Then when they think about their problems and they feel unhappy, now their body's in the past. And if you believe that your thoughts have something to do with your destiny, wow. And then the emotion that's associated to it is now the body's in the past because thoughts are the language of the brain and feelings are the language of the body. And how we think and how we feel creates our state of being. Now here's the problem. If you can't think greater than how you feel, and you believe that your thoughts have something to do with your destiny, and you understand that feelings and emotions are a record of the past, then you're thinking in the past, and your life will stay the same.
Yeah.
Important game. Well, 95% of who we are is a set of memorized behaviors, automatic emotional responses, unconscious habits, hardwired attitudes, beliefs, and perceptions that are running pretty much like a computer program. They're automatic, right? So you can think positively all you want. You can say, I'm healthy, I'm wealthy, I'm free, I'm worthy, I'm worthy. And your body's saying, no, you're not, you're miserable, right? So it makes sense that there's got to be an unlearning process. And we got to stay conscious of our unconscious thoughts that slip by our awareness unnoticed. We got to watch how we speak. We got to observe how we act. We got to pay attention to the way we're feeling, and we have to become so conscious of those unconscious states of mind and body that we don't go unconscious in our waking day. Because how you think, how you act, and how you feel is your personality, and your personality creates your personal reality. So if you're thinking the same way, you're acting the same way, and you're feeling the same way, nothing's going to change in your life, right? So then the unlearning process is as valuable as the relearning process. The breaking the habit of the old self has to happen before you reinvent a new self. You got to prune synaptic connections before you sprout new connections. You got to unfire and unwire before you refire and rewire. You got to deprogram, trial and error, then reprogram. You got to go out. You got to go out into life and try it out. Okay, I've changed my internal state. You could have a great meditation. You can connect. Your heart could open. This happened to me. You could open your heart. You'd be amazing. You feel like the day is invincible. And you get up, and then the rest of your day, you're unconscious. The 15 hours of your day. So you're going to weigh 1 hour of being in a different state of being against 15 hours of you being unhappy and rushing and in a program. So then, how many times do we have to forget until we stop forgetting and start remembering? That's called change. How many times do we have to go unconscious to the point where we no longer go unconscious and we stay conscious? That's the moment of change. Now, if you're truly out of the bleachers and you're on the playing field, and this happens to a lot of people in our work, they say, I really believe that this is the truth. I really believe that you could heal yourself. I really believe you could change your life. I've seen the testimonials. I just never believed that it could happen to me. Now, this is a big moment. Now you're really stepping on the playing field. So a person who starts doing their work, they're not interested in healing. The person who's truly interested in this work, they understand that the only way they can heal is that they have to change. They're not saying, I'm going to wait for my wealth or my healing to happen in order for me to feel grateful and be joyful in life. They're saying, if I feel grateful, my healing's going to begin, right? If I feel more whole, then there should be some change in my gene expression. So they've studied the content, they've studied the information, and now it becomes extremely practical. So they may have a great meditation, and we've seen this happen to many people. They sleep better, they have less pain, they have more energy, but their blood values never change. Now, they don't say, oh, I feel better, but I'm failing, this doesn't work. They say, what is it about me that's stopping this from completely healing? Okay, how am I in my waking day? The moment you begin to ask that question, you turn on the frontal lobe, and the frontal lobe is the seat of your conscience. Now, the moment you start looking at the end of your day, how did I do? This is such an important question. How did I do today? Did I fall from grace? When did I lose it? And who did I lose it with? If I had another opportunity, how would I do it differently? They'll tell you, I've seen them stand on the stage and tell their story and say, I had to start really watching myself in my life. How I was emotionally responding to my ex, how I was emotionally responding to my financial problems. I had to really, really pay attention to that. And that takes an enormous amount of energy and an enormous amount of awareness to stop the program, right? So you forget and you go, damn, I went unconscious there. Now, you didn't lose, you didn't fail. You just became conscious. Now, if you keep becoming so conscious of your unconscious states, you're outside the program. You're only in the program when you're unconscious. The moment you're conscious, you can objectify your subjective self. So you can see yourself through the eyes of someone else. So the learning process comes from the mistake. The brain learns by mistakes and surprises. I've made enough of them in my life. It's just whether you're going to do it again. You want to do it again, you're back in the habit, back in the routine. If you say, this is it, the next time that happens, I am not going to do that. Not for anybody else, but because those emotions actually, my response to that person or that circumstance is actually weakening the organism. Is that person, that circumstance worth it? So then it's evolution. It's evolution. The challenge then has to be met with a greater level of mind. Now, if you're just doing your meditation just because you want to please God or do the right thing or feel good about yourself, that's going to get stale after a while, because it's just going to become another routine between your coffee and your shower and your emails and your drive to work, and people aren't present, right? So the familiar past, conditioning is based on the past, that thought and the feeling, but habituation is the programming them to predictable future. That's the known. So if you teach a person how to find the present moment, that's where the unknown exists. And that takes a lot of energy and a lot of awareness. And yet, if you practice it, the body literally will begin to respond to the mind. It's like training an animal. It finally relaxes. And when that occurs, your response to people and circumstances in your life will be different, because you overcame yourself at the beginning of the day. So I'm an early morning guy just like you. I get up really early. Why? Because nobody bothers me. 4:30-ish, somewhere around there. I get in my think box. What am I doing today? But I'm not going to sit down and just jump into a meditation. What thoughts, before I go into this meditation, am I going to stay away from? Well, what circumstances, what things I can think about later that aren't that important to me? What emotions, what memories am I going to stay away from? If I go there, I know what that's going to do. I mean, why am I doing this meditation? What am I going to be doing? How am I going to do it? So I just like anybody who does anything really well, you get in your think box and you organize what you're going to do. You move around a little bit, do a few things, maybe write some notes down, because then I can assign meaning to the act. I can stay conscious. But then when I get in my play box, there's no thinking. I did all my thinking in my think box. You did all my calendar, and I go, okay, none of that. I'm going to get to all of that. This is not my time to think about the known. I know all this stuff is going to work out. I know how the Zoom meetings are going to go. Okay, but let me just make sure when I'm in these certain Zoom meetings that I'm leading with my heart and I'm being the person that I want to be as an example for my team. I want to make sure I'm communicating really clearly. I'll make time for this, that. Okay, I get all that out of the way. Well, that's all the known stuff. But when I come to execute now, what am I going to do to open my heart today? Like, what am I really going to do? When I do the breath to bring energy into my brain, what am I bringing? Like, where am I going to go to that? What do I want to experience? How do I do that? Let me just review that. Okay, then I'm going to open my focus. I'm going to go deep into nothing. I'm going to go as far as I can. And then when I get to that point, then I'm going to create. And when I create, this is what I'm going to create. So I'm not thinking in when I'm there, what should I create? I've already got that all worked out. I'm rehearsing. I'm getting clear on what I'm going to do. I'm getting clear on what I'm not going to do. I'm getting clear on how my last meditation was and how I want to evolve my next meditation. So then when I get to my play box, I'm not analyzing and thinking, because if I'm analyzing and thinking, I can't do it, right? So I get that worked out. If it takes me half an hour, I allow for 2 hours for myself. If it takes me half an hour to get very clear, and then sometimes there's disturbing things that I have to get through because there's meetings and stuff like that, but I just go, that is all always going to work out. This is you. This is your time. I want to get into it. I want to assign meaning to what I'm doing. When you assign meaning to the act, you turn on your prefrontal cortex, and the prefrontal cortex says, quiet. Everybody that's not involved in this intention, settle down. So the frontal lobe will actually lower the volumes of the circuits in the brain that are disturbance. So when you assign meaning to something, you get more value from it. So I just learned that if I just get in and just do my meditation, sometimes they're wonderful because I've done it enough times. But if I just drop in, it doesn't have any meaning. If it doesn't have any meaning, then it just becomes another routine. You're doing your meditation, but you're thinking about your coffee. You're drinking your coffee. You're already thinking about your emails. The brain's an anticipation machine, and we lose our free will to that kind of programming. So when I get my think box really clear, it's just like when I used to golf. I would just kind of look at where I was going to hit the ball. I was thinking about the club I was going to use, how I was going to swing, and how I was going to feel. I work it all out in my think box. When I get my play box, I've done all my thinking. Now I'm just going to execute, right? So we found that when people do that, we do this in our week-long events. I'll always say to the audience, all right, after we come back from the break, so turn to someone now, and I want you to have a conversation about what you love about yourself, that you did really well in that last meditation. What did you stick? What felt right for you? What did you execute really well? I want you to articulate that and remind yourself, reproduce that same level of mind, install the neurological hardware by firing and wiring so you can step into that footprint and do that again in the next meditation. Then I say to them, now let's light a match in a dark place. If you had another opportunity to do another meditation, what would you bring? What would you work on improving? What would you become aware of that you don't want to do that you did in that last meditation? Let's get really clear about what you're not going to do. And if you had another opportunity, what you would do. And somehow that kind of shapes the brain for the next experience, for them to evolve their experience, because they're in the experience now. They're like, oh yeah, I'm not getting off the exit of my job. I'm not getting off the exit of my ex. I'm going to go straight. I'm going to just keep. You can make those turns in the beginning. It's normal. But you start making those turns, and then all of a sudden you're realizing, I'm not going to make those turns, and you drive right past the exit. I drive right past, I'm too old.
Yeah.
I drive right past, I'm too out of shape. I drive right past, my disease isn't going to go away.
Yeah.
There's something wrong with me. You just keep driving past those, and the next thing you know, you run into something big. So it's trial and error, you know? I mean, this is like, it's so important for people to realize if it took them 2 years of chronic stress to develop their health condition, it's not going to go away in 2 meditations. You know, when I tell them, I say, you're not that good. You're just not that good. Like, just get real here. Like, 1 foot in the quantum world, 1 foot in the real world. I'm a pragmatist. I don't want to talk about quantum superimposition if it has no value in my life. I want to talk about what it is that evolves my experiences. So if you're truly in the game of change, then you would be rehearsing how you were going to be in the next Zoom meeting if you were really off in the last one. If you wouldn't say, oh, I'm this way because of that person or that circumstance. That's that program of being a victim saying that person or that circumstance is actually controlling the way I feel and think. My response to that person is making me sick. It's actually weakening the organism. Okay, the next time I have that opportunity, if I'm truly in the game of evolution, let's see if I can stay in my heart, and the whole time I'm not going to react. That would be a victory for me. That would be a victory. So then at the end of your day, you go, I actually kind of love myself. I actually got my behaviors to match my intentions. I got my actions equal to my thoughts. I had a new experience, and it actually felt good. Hey, I'm going to do that again. And you start doing it with your children. You start doing it, opening the door for the person who's walking out of the office building. You start letting people go ahead of you in traffic. You're just cool. You're no longer in that vigilant state. Now, get enough people doing that, all of a sudden you start noticing your wife a little bit differently, or Rangan's all of a sudden starting to smile a little bit more. He seems way more relaxed and chilled. People are going to start getting relaxed and chilled around you because mirror neurons in the tribe say, hey, there's somebody doing something that I'd like to do. I just need evidence to be able to do it. And all of a sudden, you start developing a community of people that start behaving differently. What's the significance of that? That's called emergence. An emergent consciousness is that everybody's behaving differently. And that is what's going to change the world, you know?